Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair. Isaac Asimov is one of the most prolific sci-fi authors to ever exist. I mean, the three laws of robotics that everyone cites when they talk about robots and AI were created by him in I, Robot. And even if they aren't said to be his laws, most fictional robots are imbued with similar laws. Robbie the Robot, Bishop in Aliens, even if Ash's behavior in the first movie sort of contradicted that. Even RoboCop has his directives that he has to obey without question, just like Asimov's robots have their laws. So it should come as no surprise to you to see Asimov on this show. Though it should shock you that it's taken me more than 120 episodes to get to Asimov. But that's not for lack of interest. The thing is, Asimov has written or edited more than 500 books, and a good chunk of those are collections of short stories. So there's a lot of Asimov to sift through and figure out what to review. I mean, he's done the Foundation series, the Galactic Empire series, and the Robot series, and those series have connections to each other, and it's crazy. Asimov has his own literary universe inside of those three series. But I took the easy way out. I decided to go for something familiar. We're tackling today the first book of the Robot series, The Caves of Steel. And if you're a fan of the Spoonie Experiment, you may recognize this book as being the basis for the Robots VCR board game that he did for his first official episode of Black Hole of Board Games. And that was a contributing factor for why I selected it for our first dive into Asimov. Because that board game honestly intrigued me as a story. I do enough straight sci-fi. I wanted to do something unique, and a murder mystery sci-fi story fit the bill for me. So if you don't already know the story, it's about a New York City detective named Elijah Bailey in the far future, where there's regular cities where humans live and special spacer cities for the descendants of former human colonists who went out to explore the galaxy. Bailey is tasked with solving the murder of a famous spacer scientist, and to do so, he's assigned a partner from the spacer city, who just so happens to be a human-like robot named Daniil. I know it sounds like a buddy cop story, and it sorta is, but it's also a really suspenseful and serious narrative with a lot to offer in terms of both mystery and sci-fi. Anyway, I'm sitting here telling you about it without getting straight into the review. Let's go to the distant future and take a look at Bailey and Daniil solving a murder case in the Caves of Steel. The cover is really nice. It's a shot of what I'm pretty sure is the future version of New York, though if I can say something as a New Yorker, it is way too clean to be New York. It looks a lot like Coruscant from Star Wars if the color scheme was blue metal. We've got Bailey in the foreground, standing next to some computer terminal. I hope that thing's not connected to the internet because anyone on the street can just use it to watch porn. And you know someone will. In the background, looking over the city, is Daniil. They look about how I'd imagine them. Bailey looks like a detective with the futuristic trench coat, and Daniil looks like a human dressed in what looks like the Red Dwarf uniforms from the Kachansky's Universe flashback from Ouroboros. Overall, it's a really good cover, showing us a snapshot of the story and aiding our imaginations in visualizing the characters and locales. Anyway, let's get to the story. The story centers around Elijah Bailey, a police officer in the NYPD in the far future. In the future, humanity lives in giant cities with robots, even if a lot of humans don't really like robots, since they're stealing jobs from hard-working Americans. I mean humans. There are a faction of humans called spacers, who are the descendants of humans from long ago who went out to colonize the universe, and their culture began stagnating, and so they came back to Earth, bringing their robots with them to help their so-called savage brethren. During a trip to Spacer Town, Police Commissioner Julius Enderby discovers that someone has murdered a famous spacer roboticist, Dr. Sarton. The Spacers are justifiably pissed, so Enderby calls in his former classmate and police detective, Elijah Bailey, to solve the case. The Spacers, however, insist on having a Spacer partner assigned to him, but as the Spacers are afraid of germs and diseases that they've evolved past and have no protection against, the partner will have to be a robot. Bailey doesn't like robots and expresses displeasure at the robots that already work at the police station, like R. Sammy, a basic robot that does clerical stuff, replacing a human that previously did the work. Bailey has to meet his partner, Daniil Olivar, near the Spacer City, so he goes and sees a Spacer standing there. He tells the guy that he's meeting a robot and asks if his presence can be announced, but the guy says that it's not necessary, because he is Daniil, a robot that's virtually indistinguishable from a human on the outside. They set off on their quest, though it's not that hard to start, seeing as how most of the humans hate the Spacers, and so the suspect pool is pretty large. They think that it's a medievalist who did it, someone who wants to go back to the time before they lived in big steel cities and wants to live in the open air again. They want to go back to before kids sat around playing their Pokemans and Danky Kangs, and actually went outside and kicked cans or played stickball, when people actually spoke to each other instead of texting. Though, specifically, back before robots. Bailey and Daniil get a call that there's a riot at a shoe store, where a woman refuses to be served by a robot and demands a human clerk. Medievalists get involved, and it gets heated, so Daniil points a gun at them to get them to back off, which they do, since they don't know that he's a robot and is incapable of shooting them, because of the 3 laws. After that, Bailey takes Daniil home to meet his wife Jessie and his son Bentley. He hears through his wife that there's a rumor that there's a robot in the city that looks like a human, and Bailey and Daniil leave to make sure that Jessie and Bentley are safe. And that's the story. Bentley and Daniil have to solve the case and find out who committed a murder in the Spacer City before tensions between humans and Spacers and robots boil over so much that all hell breaks loose. Bailey and Daniil attempt to solve the case, with a few false positives along the way, as Bailey initially believes that due to the shoe store incident that Daniil is actually Dr. Sarton, who Daniil was built to resemble, and that the case is a sham. But he turns out to be wrong when Daniil shows Bailey his robotic insides. The second false positive comes from a revelation that Jessie is actually a medievalist, and has been going to meetings, and she tells him of someone there that she thinks could have done it. But it's also not the case. The guy did try to chase down Bailey because he found out Daniil was a robot, but he's not a murderer. Then it comes out that our Sammy was destroyed by a piece of technology only found in a place that Bailey and Daniil had visited while being chased by the medievalists the day earlier. And so Bailey is under scrutiny as well. The Spacers decide that Sarton's death was unfortunate and that it means that the humans and Spacers cannot coexist, and they plan to leave, giving Bailey only 90 minutes to solve the case. Bailey had learned earlier that weapons weren't allowed in the Spacer City, so whoever committed the crime must have had it smuggled in some other way, like having a robot bring it to the outskirts and passing it off there. Then, Bailey notices that a certain someone seemed to be more panicked the closer that Bailey got to the truth and calmer when he lost the trail. Commissioner Enderby. Daniil disagrees with Bailey's submission since his scan of Enderby's brain shows that he was incapable of deliberate murder. But, Bailey argues, what about accidental? Bailey uses evidence to show that Enderby is a medievalist like Jessie, actually because he knew about Jessie being a member without being told, and grills the commissioner to get him to admit that he had killed Sarton, but only accidentally. He actually went there to kill Daniil, since human-like robots like Daniil were a step away from weaning humanity from Earth and getting them farther from going back to their roots. And since Sartin and Daniil were identical, on the outside he attacked Sartin thinking he was Daniil. He used our Sammy to get the gun between New York and the Spacer City, and then destroyed him to get rid of the evidence, trying to frame Bailey for Sammy's murder. The Spacers agree not to prosecute since they were going to leave without solving the case anyway, and Bailey asked Daniil to remain behind on Earth, having been swayed to the Spacers' way, hoping that one day after he's gone, Daniil could take Bentley, or Bentley's children, out into the stars. Come on, come on, come on! Yes! Oh, I caught a shiny. We'll be right back. Oh, who's the best little skidoo? You are. We're back. Pokemon on me is really addicting. I gotta stop playing Pokemon during the commercials. The book has a wealth of interesting characters. Bailey is great. He is a typical detective and the one in the movie who resents the partner, but he ends up getting along with Daniil really well. Admittedly, part of it is Dr. Fastoff, a spacer scientist at the interview, giving Bailey a drug to make him more suggestible to the spacer's point of view. But even after the drug wears off, he's still considering it. He is our eyes and ears in the story, and his life and memories serve as a great help to allow the reader to know about the world that he lives in. His only desire is to keep his family safe and provided for, since his father had lost everything and he grew up in a situation very similar to people who grew up during the Depression. And he wants to ensure that his family has enough money to stay afloat. Daniil is also interesting. He's a lot like Data from Star Trek The Next Generation, being very curious about human customs, and he also aids the reader in finding out about the future world, since he asks questions that Bailey wouldn't think of, since Bailey lives on Earth. And I gotta say, I did not expect Enderby to be the killer. Asimov did a great job keeping that until near the end and the pieces started to fall into place. It's never deliberate obfuscation, but as a person who grew up watching police procedurals, it is very rare that the killer is the person who found the body. He was away a lot during the case, which naturally leads to his identity as the killer, but it also means that we don't know as much about him as Bailey does, having worked and known him for years. Dr. Fastoff is a weird character. On the one hand, he is right about humanity needing to go out among the stars, but he also drugs Bailey to get him to join his cause, which isn't right. It does help Bailey solve the murder since it lets him see a point of view that he would normally ignore, but strictly speaking on principle, it was, as Bird Person would say,
a dick move.
Bailey's wife Jessie has an interesting story, her entire arc being that she felt that Bailey had destroyed her little bit of rebellion and joined the medievalists out of her desire to get it back, not really out of her desire to see humans go back to their roots. See, her full name is Jezebel, as in the biblical figure who was not the best person. And Bailey told her that historically, Jezebel probably wasn't as bad as the Bible claims. Her other purpose is to be Bailey's ear to the street, telling him of the rumors that she hears from either the other wives or from her meetings. Even all the minor characters, the medievalists, the random people in New York City, they all feel distinct and unique regardless of their impact on the story. All of the characters in this book are interesting and unique, and Asimov managed to give them all distinct personalities that enhance the enjoyment of the story. The book has action around every corner. We get police chases on foot, we have robots pointing loaded blasters at humans, we get excitement when Bailey thinks he has the answer and starts accusing, we have action between the characters with moments of character development, especially with Bailey, Daniil, and Jessie. The entire friendship between Bailey and Daniil developing is awesome, and seeing Bailey go from being mistrustful of robots to actually worrying that he'd never see Daniil again is a great development, and speaks to Asimov's skills as a writer. The stuff with Jesse is great too, since we get to see the history of their relationship in flashbacks from Bailey's memory at certain points, and we get to know about his destroying her biblical namesake well before she's a factor in the medievalist storyline. Sometimes it feels like extraneous plot details, but everything comes back to mean something later. The chase scenes are great, with awesome descriptions of all the locales they pass through in New York City, and Asimov does a great job of getting across the image of the far future of humanity. The rivalry between the humans and the spacers is also well done, showing that the spacers aren't without sin, being assholes. But so are the humans, and they, for the most part, do get past their differences. Though the spacers get past the differences by leaving as to not cause all-out war. The story is edge-of-the-seat excitement, even though I had a fair amount of foreknowledge due to seeing the gameplay for the VCR board game. And I have to say, I was really invested in Bailey and Daniil's partnership. A human and a robot as cops? That's awesome! And Bailey and Daniil are so unique and interesting that I was excited to see where their partnership went and how it helped solve the case. And like I said, I was trying to solve the mystery along the way, and I was blown away by the solution. But the best of all is the arc with the discrimination against robots. Unlike a lot of stories, it's not solved at the end. There are still riots and still medievalists, but a few people have been changed. And as Captain James T. Kirk said, in every revolution there is one man with a vision. So there is the chance that Bailey could help spearhead the world into coexisting with robots. And I think that's the most compelling action in the story, the development of seeing how the robots and humans interact, and seeing it at its highest and lowest, but knowing that it can change. Since Bailey managed to change the mind of their second suspect, making him not as hateful against robots, with Daniil's pushing and Fastoff's influence. This book is fantastic. I mean, it's a great sci-fi story and a great mystery, which, according to the internet, was something that Asimov advocated, that sci-fi isn't just its own genre. You can add sci-fi elements to anything, which this story succeeds at. This is both one of the best mysteries and one of the best sci-fi stories that I've ever read. With its diverse cast of characters, fascinating sci-fi elements, and gripping mystery elements, it's got something for everyone. The novel is one of Asimov's best, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I also highly recommend it if you like sci-fi and mystery stories, but also if you're someone who doesn't usually like either sci-fi or mystery, but like the other. Because stuff like this can make something you don't like accessible, and I think that this story might be able to turn some people onto a genre they don't normally enjoy. The buddy cop elements are great, and the mystery is a nail-biter at certain parts. The world is interesting and diverse, and the book has a lot to offer to all types of readers. Overall, the book is brilliant, and I recommend it to anyone who seems vaguely interested in the premise, because it's a great read and accessible to even those who don't like hard science fiction. And that was The Caves of Steel. Was it good? Of course it was. It's Isaac Asimov. It was a brilliant sci-fi tale, and in addition to adding to the Asimov shared universe, it is well worth your time as a reader. Even though I am biased due to loving both mysteries and science fiction, I think this should be on everyone's must-read list. I mean, it's so good that I managed to sit down and do nothing but read it for a solid hour. If you've never read Asimov, I'd say it's a good jumping-on point, since it's the first novel in the Robot series, and since Asimov contributed heavily to the sci-fi lexicon, the concepts should be easy to follow, even if you've never read his work before. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of the Literary Lair, you can hit that subscribe button. And if you have any comments or complaints about the video, you can put those in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this video, show it to your friends and share it around the internet. And maybe consider supporting the show on Patreon. See you next time. In this future, humanity lives in giant cities with robots, even if a lot of humans don't like robots, since they're stealing jobs from hard-working Americans. I mean humans. Oh, do that.